Everybody, welcome to these latest Trends Insights with Pam Sands, Executive Committee Member representing Kelly at the WEC. I'm Francesca Profeta, Research Analyst at SIA. We're going to be looking at latest trends for the industry based on research that SIA has produced recently, and also the research for Work We Want that's been produced by the WEC. So, Pam, we really wanted to start off and discuss some of the latest trends that we were seeing. And this is really based off the listed staffing company trends analysis I've recently produced. And this report really does take a high-level look at the evolution of words and phrases appearing in staffing listed company annual reports. Unfortunately, this kind of spiked my intrigue when I started noticing certain words missing from annual reports. So in some companies, they'd maybe only mention the phrase or word woman once or twice. And it got me thinking, what is important to staffing companies? So what I did is I started to segment the data according to characteristics pertaining to things like growth, equality, remote work, platformization, outsourcing, skills, the pandemic, ESG, development, and also well-being. And what I can tell you that of all of the words and the phrases analysed, growth has had the most hits over the years, nearly reaching 10,000 hits. So unfortunately last year, and reflecting quite a difficult, challenging environment that the industry has been facing, we did actually see a decline by 11% year on year. But as an industry, I think we can say that we like to keep things rather positive rather than focus on the negative. Because if I started to look at things such as decline, this was only used a fraction of the time. So it was only used over 1,300 times. But if moving forward, quality and those kind of themes were actually the highest scoring theme in this year's report. Not surprisingly, as the list of significant companies with a flat platform component is actually much larger now. So before the pandemic, we thought there were about 4 companies that had some kind of staffing platform, but now that's reached about 12. So there's a massive importance on the platformization of this industry. But something that is important, I know, Pam, you have referred to this in the report with the WEC, is the word environment. It's becoming an ever increasingly important word, and companies are really getting behind ESG. That was actually the largest increase, the most significant increase we saw over the 4 years that we analysed this data. It went up by 3,791%. So it's a massive increase, really, that we are seeing. And I believe that was roughly something that staffing companies executives have also noticed in the Work We Want document that you produced, Pam.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Francesca. And so first of all, congratulations to the SIA for this body of work. This trend report takes a different and very curious look at how we all report out the words we use to report out on the work we do as agency work or as staffing work. But I'm not surprised to see us marching in that direction. And especially as we're sitting here at the end, it's hard to believe, at the end of 2024 and heading towards 2030 with a lot of the commitments made as part of the UN Global Compact, and especially those that are around environmental sustainability and ESG, that if you think about our industry overall, right, we are a reactionary industry to the needs of our business, right, and the needs of our clients. And so as we're seeing our clients enhance their strategies, as we're seeing Scope 3 requirements come, as we see across the EU, the CSRD requirements, there's no surprise that we're also going to see this. And we're going to see a need for us to look at our industry, which is pretty much one of the clean industries in what we do. But how are we supporting the needs of our clients? How are we helping them with their reporting, their audit worthiness? But also bringing to the table, what I see we can bring to the table is a very strong S in ESG, which is around the social component of what we do, because at the heart of what we do, we provide people for work. And so that's where I think there's not a lot of surprises there. It's something we should expect to see even more. And in the Work We Want, campaign that was done by the WEC, that's part of the work life we want. And it's also part of that missing workforce that we might not be reaching because of the purposeful nature of what they're looking for in work. So I think there's a lot of connection points for us here to unpack together, not necessarily a time on this call, but definitely as we go forward in how we're meeting those needs of clients and the talent alike in the industry.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely important to note that the younger generations are playing such a high prevalence in this area when it comes to caring about the work that they want. So it's the work we want, but we're also doing the work that they want. And they want a job where they can feel has an impact, is meaningful in that sense. So definitely an area that more and more companies overall are paying much more attention to because of the clients and because of their staff as well, the workforce as a whole. One thing that did, and I can imagine is very similar, is training. Training was the fourth most sought after word in this report, receiving nearly 5,000 hits. It saw a 12% increase and over the years, and just last year it saw an additional 30%. But given the tight labour markets, I actually thought this would be a much more prominent place. I thought it would be really up there, like skilling, reskilling. We prefer to use words such as training rather than skilling and reskilling. We're not kind of enthusiastic about those kind of words, even though I thought they would be much more prominent. That was surprising to me. What do you feel, Pam?
I wasn't as surprised, to be honest, in that, because we've known for a while that the labor shortages that we have, which are significant, as we all know, some of the numbers out there are by 2030, we're going to have about 85 million jobs without individuals to fill them. There's not exactly a direct match between the people that are looking for work and the skills that are needed in those jobs to fill those occupations, right? So we've known that not only in the private sector, but more prominently in the public sector within those public workforce programs, looking at how do you make sure that you've got a workforce ready for the future of work as well as the work of today. So I wasn't as surprised. Where I think the conversation will become very interesting as we work on this together is in the what we do and how we do it. And I think that's where this conversation can really start leading, which is around the collaboration and the partnerships we have. Partnering with organizations that are already very proficient in how to do that, because it's not necessarily been in our direct wheelhouse in our industry and in agency work. So how do we partner with those organizations that are closer to that conversation, also working with the clients we work with, and how can we together look for ways that we can remove some of the barriers for work for individuals, but also look at how are we really not just focusing on by the time we get someone trained, is that skill that we gave them already going to be extinct? Because I wake up every day with a philosophy of the technology I used yesterday is already behind, and I have to learn what are we using today, right? So I think as we talk about this and you align it with a technology and automation conversation, there's definitely linkage points in there that we all need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think the whole training portion, especially when we look at areas such as skill shortages, so going back up to what we mentioned initially, we see areas such as youth unemployment being massively impacted in this area, female participation rates, because perhaps they might need training to re-enter the markets. Is that something that your clients are particularly worried about, or they see this as an opportunity? Because obviously finding those kinds of niche workforce that really needs to get back into the industries is something that we must focus on. And this is something where government can really help. And obviously with the assistance of the World Employment Confederation, you're really in a great position to be able to advise in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what this speaks to is a lot of the agendas that we'll see that I know we'll be talking about in a few moments, but what are those social programs that are happening across the globe in each market? And I think it's also a very complex problem that doesn't get solved with simple answers, to be honest. So I think it's the questions that we ask. And I think as I thought about this call and I thought about our conversations, it comes back to those power of the questions that we're asking. So are we asking the right questions of what's happening in the environment around us? Are we asking the questions regarding what the needs of our clients are and what those future needs are that they need to have met? What are those skills based, and how do we start looking at skills based competencies? And then we also look at not only the person and who does the work, but how is the work getting done? Because if the work is getting done between, an automation and a human, or it's directly human, or it's directly from an automation component, like with robotic process automation and all of those things we're very comfortable talking about now, when you ask how the work gets done, that helps bring you to a different level of conversation for then what do we need to do for the worker. And I think getting proficient at asking some of those hard questions or different questions that are future leading will help us get to some potentially better outcomes for these complex situations.
Yeah, and it definitely does lead to different styles and different approaches to the industry, right? So we've recently published just this year, for the first time, a recruit, train, deploy research report. So these are becoming more prevalent in the industry. They offer quite a unique solution to fill those existing skill gaps, and particularly if there's technology related items, like you said, you wake up every day and something's sort of redundant and you need to learn something new. So this could be an additional area, an alternative really to traditional education, and it can really embrace and open up that candidate pool. That is something that we can do as a private sector, but as a public sector, obviously we're in a time where governments have never been more at the front with all of these different elections. How do you see more government and legislation really aiding the industry?
I think that it's a unique time. As we know, 2024 was a year of super global elections. Over half of the world's population has the opportunity to have voted this year, as in across 60 plus countries. We just saw a milestone event yesterday with the first female president in Mexico. And if you follow that from a trend perspective, that is significant. And I think what we have to do is look at first, what are the labor market impacts coming from this election cycle that has happened in 2024? Stay close to those type of initiatives through partnerships, much like this one we have today with SIA and the World Employment Confederation, but as well looking at other organizations like the World Economic Forum and others that we all have those ancillary and adjacent relationships with, to say, all right, let's look at this country, region, culture specific and say, what are the labor market implications? How do we then, through those labor market implications, look at our growth strategy, look at the social protection strategies, and then also look at the what's happening geopolitically within that environment that can impact how we connect people to work. And I think getting into those conversations, getting that into the dialogue we have, seeing that in the future in reports like you did this year, where we also have that what's happening in the geopolitical environment as part of our strategy, will help us all as we look at the world of work in the future.
Yeah, and we're also looking for these kind of elections to really, we're seeing it's quite a complex market conditions that we're all facing at the moment. So, the staffing industry does thrive on that kind of market stability. So elections results that can promote business growth and that economic stability generally do have a positive effect on the industry. Most markets are correlated to GDP, and obviously conversely, those that create uncertainty, difference, legislative issues can really impact the industry as a whole. One thing that I was quite surprised that received really low performing kind of phrases over the 5 years that I looked into this were things like blockchain, direct sourcing, limited visibility. I think these can be attributed to like the nascency of maybe those products or how companies are maybe not using them. But something that really did surprise me was areas that are really important to staffing companies that do provide nice revenue streams, such as VMS, MSP. They're very important to their clients and their customers, but it really didn't highlight that in this reporting. Do you think that we're maybe moving away from this kind of technology, or is that just something that wasn't necessary to promote to the sort of shareholders as such?
It was fascinating to see that, right? Especially with the reliance on the technology, especially for your larger global programs, right? It was fascinating to me to see that also. I think time will tell in that. I think it's interesting to be in any conversation right now regarding technology with the advancements that are happening, as we've already mentioned, on a daily basis. And I think some good questions to ask there is the technology that we're all using today relevant for the client's needs of the future, especially with all the things we've talked about today and so many more we could talk about, especially global talent mobility and migration, right? Some good questions to ask without reflecting on any technology is what is the global capability of that technology? What attributes does the technology have to understand local labor market conditions, right? How easy is it to use? How easy is it to modify, right? Are all good questions as we look into this, but it is fascinating to see where it landed in this report.
Something that I think we can both really look upon is how fluid our industry is. Things like the pandemic, the impact of Ukraine, wars, and so on and so forth, they appear in our annual report as quickly as they disappear. So I think that was something that really did occur to me. Like, it's a very fluid, fast-paced industry, and we're quickly sort of counteracting and going on to the next thing constantly. So if we start to look into, what does the agencies of the future look like? What does the industry of the future look like? How do you see that, Pam? I've got some ideas, and I've been speaking to some people, so which is slightly controversial ideas, but I'm happy to hear your thoughts first.
I will have to bring out my crystal ball for that, Francesca. Don't have it out here today, but what I will say is I think that our industry of the future has the possibility of looking quite different than what we're looking at today. I've actually been playing around with some ideas myself that if we were in 2035 and we were looking back at 2025 coming up, what are we going to see in 2035 that we had no idea was going to exist where we sit today? And I think that as we look at what does that industry of the future look like, I think it's also tied to what do we think we want it to look like? What are those external factors that are influencing that? How closely are we aligned with those external factors that are impacting our clients in the industries they represent? Take it up a level from just the client to the industry. What are the geopoliticals? And then look at how it looks. I personally think we're going to see, for just my thought on the matter, one woman's opinion is I think we're going to see a lot frictionless environment between how that ecosystem connects with each other and gets the work done. That's going to be one of my predictions, is that we see a lot less friction in that environment where there has to be so many humans involved, but the humans are going to be important to the strategy. So I think it's that finding that balance within how human and automation comes together is definitely a component of that.
Yeah, so I had a conversation last week with a few people actually at different staffing firms, and we were talking about this particular fact. And the conversation that actually did stick with me was one of the chaps did feel that the staffing industry, as we know it, has reached its product life cycle, and maybe that we will have to, although we feel like we're fast paced, we tend to take time to adapt technology. We tend to take time to move on to new things. And I think for the staffing firms of the future, they will really need to adjust to several emerging trends and challenges that are going to be facing us in order to remain competitive and successful. And just a couple of them that really come to mind would be obviously technology integration, staying up to date with the most recent technology and how you use it to be more productive, especially with the rise of AI in areas such as candidate sourcing or so on and so forth. We do, as you say, work in a environment where flexible talent models will have to be implemented. Very much like I mentioned earlier about the training, Temp in our survey did say that having training is highly important to them. So they want to be trained, but also what is highly important is having that flexibility. So we will have to learn how to cater to this and provide solutions and so on and so forth. another thing that I thought about was enhanced candidate experience. You know, with that talent scarcity that we've been speaking about facing so many industries, they'll have to, you know, staffing firms are going to have to really focus on providing excellent candidate experience, regular engagement. This could either be via technology or, you know, transparent communication, onboarding across the entire product, you know, life cycle that we provide our clients. So yeah, these are the kind of things that I was more and more thinking about. However, obviously, sustainability, social responsibility does maintain its place right up there. An area that I don't feel that got much visibility and actually is highly underrepresented is when we look at LGBTQ plus involvement. That was a big area that was lacking this year in reporting. Is that something that you could comment on at all, Pam?
Sure, happy to do so. It's something that I stay close to both for my work in the WEC and professionally is what is the representation across our industry? Are we representing the broader populations of the people that we serve and the clients that we serve? And we're traditionally seeing not only our communities of LGBTQ, but other underrepresented groups not fully visible in our industry from our contingent workforce, but also from our full-time workforce. And I think there's some strategies we can all look at for that is how are we being intentional about reaching the broad range of talent in the market and making sure that we are looking at that holistically, that we're looking at the demographic shifts that are happening within our populations, within our different countries, and even more holistically, and saying, are we coming back to that intention? Are we looking at inclusive sourcing strategies? Are we looking to put individuals in roles that are recruiting the talent for ourselves internally and externally that represent those communities? And are we connected to those partnership organizations that are helping us connect that? And I think that's a big area for all of us because we need to make sure that we're having that diversity of thought in our conversations regarding the needs that our clients have, what they're putting out into the market, into their contributions, right? And that we've got the right diversity of thought representing that across our ecosystem.
And that was one thing that was actually encouraging when I was writing this report is obviously we've had quite a lot of backlash, especially in the US, with regard to DE&I programs and mandates and so on and so forth. But something that was really great to see is that there was actually no holding back. It was an area that was increasing in interest. Organisations are doing more and more in that space. So that was something that, you know, was really encouraging to see. As an industry, we're definitely not taking a backward step in that role. I don't feel. So that was encouraging. I think one thing that will be key moving forward, and something that came to my attention just today, actually, because in our daily news we had some data from Ego and Zenda regarding leadership, actually. And what I did find very interesting is it showed that 80% of CEOs acknowledge an expanded role beyond their leadership of their companies. So the survey went into more detail, and it became very apparent that CEOs of the future do see themselves as being positioned as really key architects to social progress in this area. So they recognise that they will have to foster what you've been talking about, curiosity, openness with the organisation, and meet critical challenges face on. 75% did say that they saw themselves more as a role modelling, as a powerful lever, you know, and 60% were very aware that they had to really incorporate the whole networking approach to their leadership. So leadership playing an ever more critical role within our industry as a whole, I think.
Absolutely. In our industry and across all industries, right? These are unusual times that we're in. There is more that leaders of our organizations have had to face in the last 5 years, if you think about it, than others have had to face in the years prior to that. And it's really requiring so much more of any leader, whether that is leading yourself or leading a large organization. And there are some critical skills that I think are going to be important to that. I think we're going to see a rise in things like more conversations around empathy, for example, around the social pieces, you're going to see a rise in more, global awareness, I think, of what's going on across organizations. And then also just looking at how are we looking at the sustainability of our industry, and how are we mentoring and coaching those future leaders when you think about the age of our industry, right, and the tenure of how are we then looking at that legacy work that's happening. And I think those three things could be really interesting for all of us to pick up on as leaders, and make sure that we're showing up that way for our people, the people in the industry, and all that we represent.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect way to wrap up. How do we promote ourselves to nurture the future of the industry, the future leaders, the future workforce? So with that, Pam, I'd like to thank you very much for this discussion. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon.
Thank you, Francesca. Same on my end. Always a pleasure. Always great to talk to you and SIA. And thank you again for all the work that you do.